Good morning. This week's parsha, Nasso, is the longest parsha in the Torah. If you want an interesting piece of trivia, the parsha has 176 psukim. That's a magic number. Most parshas probably have a region of 100, 110, 20, 176. Very long parsha, made so long by the description of the offerings of all of the tribal leaders towards the end of the parsha. The interesting, the way it connects interestingly is that the longest Psalm, the longest chapter in the book of Psalms, chapter 119, also has 176 verses, and the longest Gemara out of the whole Talmud is Bava Batra, which has 176 pages. One of those very interesting things. Now, in the parasha of Nasso, amongst the topics covered are the themes of the Sotah and the Nazir. Now, the Sotah is a woman who is suspected by her husband of committing adultery. Basically, what happens is he has suspicions with her and his wife and a certain man, and he says to her, "I don't want you to be alone with this man," because he's suspicious. And then we have witnesses who see that they were alone, who testify that they were indeed alone together. In such a case, where it's what our sages call raglaim ladavar, there are legs to the matter. It seems very apparent that something is going on over his teeth. He's suspecting something, telling her not to go with the guy. She does go with the guy. So we suspect that she and this man may have committed adultery together. So there is a test that's done in the temple. And what the Torah calls this, it says, Ish asher ya'avor alav ruach kinah, a man upon whom will pass a spirit of kinah. Now, kinah usually means jealousy, and jealousy is certainly not seen as a good thing in Judaism. King Solomon in the book of Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, says, Urkav atzamot kinah, jealousy rots the bones. It's seen as a very destructive and horrible thing. But, on the other hand, we have Hashem saying, El Kana, I am a God of kinah, kana. So, and over here, we don't seem to blame the guy for feeling this kinah when he sees this illicit or evidence to this illicit relationship. So Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch has a great insight into what the word kinah actually means. He says it's related to the Hebrew word kana, which is spelled differently with a hey at the end instead of an aleph. But it's related to the word kana, which means to acquire. Kinah, he says, means to assert your ownership over something. Now, is that good or bad to assert your ownership over something? Well, the answer is it depends on whether it's yours, whether you own it. If you don't own it and you're asserting ownership, that's what we call jealousy, where I want to have what is yours. But if it is something that you do in fact own and you're asserting your ownership of it, that's absolutely right and justified. When Hashem speaks about himself as a jealous God, what he's saying is like a God of kinah. What he's saying is that he is prepared to stand his claim for the Jewish people. He is not prepared to let that relationship go by the wayside. He's not prepared to give up on us. I think it's a very powerful idea. Then what you find in the Torah is the smichut parshiot, which in English is known as juxtaposition, the fact that two sections come right after one another. The order of the laws given in the Torah is never by accident. They're always inferences that we can make. And in this case, after the story of the Sotah, is the story of the Nazir. Nazir, the Nazarite, which is something that can apply to men or women, Nazarite or Nazarite-s. When it comes to the Nazarite, that is something that a person can accept a vow upon themselves that they will not drink any wine or have any grape products, will not come into contact with the dead. And the question is, this person there, the aspect of the restriction will focus upon is their withholding from wine. This person who's not drinking wine, what's that got to do with the story of the Sotah? And Rashi quotes from our sages over here from the Gemara in Sotah, page 2a. He says, Lama nismecha parshat Nazir la parshat Sotah. Why is the section of the Nazir put close to, juxtaposed to the section of the Sotah? L'malacha, to teach you. Shekol haroeh Sotah b'fil kula. Whoever sees the Sotah in her denigration, yazir atzmo min hayayin, shumevi lidei niuf, should withhold himself from wine because he should learn, he should see that wine is something that can bring to adultery. In other words, what happens is that people who are socializing a little too intimately, right? This couple where she's really married and she's with this other guy, and they're socializing, they're sitting and they're drinking wine, and one thing leads to another. She ends up committing adultery, or possibly committing adultery. The Nazir should see this and take a lesson and say, I'm going to abstain from wine for a little bit. Now, on a simple level, what's going on over here is that he is a person who is sensitive to his environment, who's aware of what's going on in the world, and who is responsive to it. Now, this was something Rabbi Goldfein of blessed memory used to emphasize time and time again, that you have to see what's happening in the world and respond appropriately. Don't just go on doing what you're thinking in your head, when meanwhile what's happening on the ground is something very different. You have to respond to what's happening in the world. Now, that we see, one of the great examples of this is Yitro, was the example I always used to give. Yishma Yitro v'yavo. Yitro heard about the splitting of the sea and the plagues in Egypt and everything else, the war against Amalek, and he comes to join the Jewish people. Many, many people heard about these happenings. They were world-shaking events. The response was, the difference with Yitro was that he did something about it. Everyone else heard about them and they said, okay, very nice. It's nice that there was such a miracle. Yitro did something about it. The Kotzker Rebbe gives a different example when it comes to Moshe at the burning bush. That he's, I beg your pardon, it's from the Kotzker Rebbe or the Midrash. It escapes me at the moment. But when it comes to Moshe at the burning bush, that, yes, is the Kotzker Rebbe. It says, Vayar Hashem ki sar lirot. Moshe sees the burning bush and he turns aside to go and investigate it. Hashem saw that he had turned to investigate it, and Hashem chose him to be a leader of the Jewish people. And the Kotzker Rebbe said, what's implied over here is that Moshe was not the only one to see the bush. But other people saw it, shrugged, and carried on with their daily life. Moshe saw that there was something here, and he went and he investigated it. But Dr. David Pelkovitz, Yeshiva University, asks a fascinating question. He said, why is this man withholding, all women, Nazir applies to women as well, why is this person withholding themselves from wine? Because they should learn from what happened with the Sotah. But aren't they already learning from what's happening with the Sotah? Aren't they already seeing that she is publicized, that she may have committed adultery, she has to perform this public test, she has to have her hair uncovered, she's actually humiliated publicly. Isn't that itself enough of a lesson? And the answer that he gives is no. And psychological studies back this up. I beg your pardon, that in fact, when we see people doing things, that makes us more likely to do the same thing, even if we see that it has negative consequences. There was a study done in 1996 about teenage pregnancy, that girls whose teenage friends had fallen pregnant, became more likely themselves to fall pregnant. Even though they could see how it to many times ruined these girls' lives. It was completely inconvenient. It was many times a tragedy. Such a pregnancy was a tragedy. Nonetheless, these girls became more likely to become pregnant, because when you are, when other people are doing it, we as human beings, we tend to associate ourselves with the actions of others. And so what Dr. Pelkovitz says, it's not simply a case of, well, he sees it and that reminds him and learns a lesson, he responds to it. It's actually more than that. This is his recovery for having to see her. It's not that seeing her is simply the catalyst for him to undergo this process, which maybe he should have anyway. It's that seeing the Sotah actually makes him more likely to do the wrong thing, and therefore he has to do something to fix himself up and to come right. So the message is over here: Kin'ah, asserting your ownership over something. If it is not yours, by no means. If it is yours, then absolutely you should. You shouldn't give up the things that are special and precious. The flip side is that the Sotah both awakens us to the dangers of wine and desensitizes us to the dangers of infidelity. And so therefore that was the role of the Nazir. Not enough to see something over there, you have to make it real for you. Have a wonderful Shabbos.